Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing a video response to the wonderful Sammy Menzo and her Tarot Inside Out challenge. Inside Out is one of my favorite movies of all time. I don't watch a lot of movies and film, but that movie I have seen more than probably any other. I think it is a masterpiece. I love the way that emotions are represented and how complex, nuanced emotions are explored. It's just incredible. I love it. And I love Samantha Menzo, so obviously I had to get in on this tag. I will leave a link to her video in the description box below where you can find out more about how she came up with this tag based on a TikTok trend. Basically, the idea is to pick up to 3 tarot cards, preferably from a variety of tarot decks if you have them, that represent each emotion or each character from Inside Out for you. So we've got joy, fear, sadness, anger, and disgust. And because one of my favorite parts of the movie is when we start to learn about combined memories and emotions, I also have sort of like added on a little bit at the end of this tag, so stay tuned for that. So for happy, I've picked the Queen of Coins from the My Garden deck, the Hanging Woman from the Gentle Tarot, and the Two of Cups from the Idiosyncradeck Tarot. For me, these all just captured a sense of happiness and joy immediately the moment I looked at these. The Two of Cups is probably one of the easier ones to talk about. I think it just reminds me so much of family and comfort. Drinking tea and having tea together is such a big part of my family and our family experience. Ever since I can remember, I've been drinking tea with my mum, my dad, my grandparents, my aunties. In fact, I remember complaining when I was like really little about the fact that I wasn't allowed to have tea with the adults, and dad like heating up a little cup of milk and dipping a tea bag in so that I could join in on the tea festivities. And for me, that is just so symbolic of home, of connection, of love, of taking care of one another, of the invitation to come together, to share, to have conversations. Basically just sort of sums up the best part of being a part of my family, and it just makes me so happy to think about. The Hanging Woman from the Gentle Tarot, I just love the movement here and the freedom. I think hanging upside down on the swing, it just feels almost childlike and innocent. It just feels like such a peaceful, spacious, happy card. And the Queen of Coins from the My Garden deck, I just love this. This feels a little bit playful, a bit cheeky, a bit funny. I don't know what this character is holding in their left hand, but it looks like they've got sort of like an apple which has a pentacle on it in their right hand. And they just sort of look like they're having a good time in this tree, and it just kind of makes me smile. It makes me laugh a little bit. And I think this feeling is quite similar to the one evoked from the Hanging Woman in the Gentle Tarot, in that, you know, like the legs are in the air, there's sort of like this freedom, this movement, this levitation, but it's just got a bit of a different vibe, where the Gentle Tarot Hanging Woman feels almost serene and just happy. The Queen of Coins feels playful, silly, childlike. And I think together these 3 cards really capture my idea of joy. Next, we have the emotion of fear. And my 3 cards for fear are the Justice card from the Sasuraibito Tarot, the Devil card from the This Might Hurt Tarot, and the 5 of Pentacles from the Children of Litha. Again, for me, these all capture very different aspects of the emotion of fear. I think the Justice card from the Sasuraibito is just so visceral, like the way that this eye is opened and so close to that knife. Like it makes me want to scrunch my eyes up and avert my gaze in response to seeing this card. It's really uncomfortable to look at. And I think this says a lot about the fact that justice and striving for justice can be a really uncomfortable, often scary thing to do. Challenging the status quo is not comfortable, and I think this card captures that really well. The Devil card from the This Might Hurt Tarot I think is a little bit more interesting and maybe a bit more specific to me. The way that the people are sort of all chained up with these red chains underneath the devil. It almost looks like a club atmosphere, except they're all chained. And when I looked at this card, it just made me think of my own experience of alcohol abuse and how that came from such a place of fear, of wanting to avoid my complex and difficult emotions. And so I think this card demonstrates that behavior and that response to fear very well. But then a little part of me is also always just a little bit scared of going back there. Like this idea and this chokehold that substances can have on us when we're in such a place of fear and we don't have other avenues for supporting ourselves and taking care of ourselves. Like that is scary to me. So this card I think captures a very specific kind of fear, but also a very specific kind of response to fear. And then the 5 of Pentacles from the Children of Litha. Honestly, it was hard not to pick a card from the Children of Litha for almost every emotion. The Children of Litha is so evocative to me and just like so strong with its portrayal of emotion. And this one in particular, I think there's so many aspects to fear that come across here. Like clearly the deer here is like looking around and is very cautious and scared of maybe a noise that she's heard in the background. And she's worried about taking care of her babies. It's cold, it's desolate, they're exposed. And then on top of that, the connotations of the Five of Pentacles often being about scarcity and lack. When I look at this image, I just feel her vulnerability and her anxiety. I think it's a very clever depiction of a particular kind of vulnerability, isolation, and fear that comes along with that. Next, we have the emotion of sadness. And again, I've chosen 3 cards. Again, I've tried to diversify which decks these are coming from as much as possible. So I ended up going with the 8 of Chalices from the Star Spinner Tarot, the 6 of Swords from the Liminal Tarot, and the 5 of Cups from the Next World Tarot. Firstly, the thing that I noticed when laying these cards out together is there's a very strong color palette here of blues and pinks and purples. The 8 of Chalices from the Star Spinner Tarot, I think, is just really quite moving. It's this character situated on the shore, and in the background we have this castle, and it just feels like in one way or another she's been cast out, or she can't get back home. She's naked, she's vulnerable, and it almost looks like she's shivering, like she's cold. It just feels so desolate and heartbreaking. And I especially love that distinction of like the blues in the bottom half where she is and the pinks in the top half where she can't access. There's such a strong sense of resignation here. The 6 of Swords in the Liminal Tarot has always been one of my favorite cards in this deck. I love like the almost magical, fantastical elements here. It just feels quite whimsical, but obviously the tone and the way the characters are shrouded adds to this sort of bittersweet, sad element to it. Here it feels like there's a lot of sadness and grief for whatever they've had to leave behind, but there is optimism and hope for where they're moving to. Like it seems like these characters have left a really dire situation, but there is hope for refuge. And all around the card, it's so dark, but the closer they get to that like Cloud City, the brighter it gets. But right now, they're still very much in that darkness, in the thick of it. And then the 5 of Cups from the Next World Tarot, we literally have someone, it looks like sort of leaving some kind of offering on a gravestone. And the card is titled Loss. For me, the expression on this person's face, it seems like there's so much hurt still there, even if time has passed. But what I love about this is the particular response to loss and grief and sadness. Like this person is taking the time to honor their emotions and their experience of sadness. They're not running away from those really challenging big emotions of grief. Instead, they're leaning right into them. And with all these gravestones around the person, some large and beautiful, others are just rocks. It's, I think, a reminder that, you know, regardless of our situation in life, we will all experience loss and grief. And so even though this person's experience right now seems to isolate them in a way, it seems so individual to them, that is true, but at the same time, in so many ways, it's also a universal experience. The next emotion is anger, and this is the first time that I'm doubling up with cards from decks that I've already chosen cards from, but I couldn't help it. The Next World Tarot and the Children of Litha just capture emotions for me so well. So the cards that I chose for anger are the 9 of Wands from the Fantastic Menagerie Tarot, the 5 of Wands from the Children of Litha Tarot, and the Justice card from the Next World Tarot. The 9 of Wands from the Fantastic Menagerie just feels like brutish anger coming out in violence. Like we have this like rat character with a gun sort of stomping around, almost looks like it's like threatening to find someone, or I don't know, like it just feels so intensely angry and agitated. Like this character feels like someone has crossed them or done them wrong and they are out to settle the score. The 5 of Wands from the Children of Litha, I just feel like this is such a strong evocative image with these tigers really going at it with like their gnarled mouths. But what really, really made me pick this card above any other, and I pulled out so many cards in consideration, was the way that their eyes are like yellow. It almost looks like they're possessed, like they don't have a choice in how violent they are being, which I think does sing true to a type of experience of anger. Like when we sort of rile ourselves up to a certain level, it's almost hard to, I don't know, calm yourself back down and de-escalate a situation. Even the movement and the red in the background, it's all just so strong and intense. And these tigers are not going easy and they are not backing down. And then for a bit of a different perspective on anger and I think the behaviors around anger, I had to choose the Justice card from the Next World Tarot. I love this card. In this card, we see a whole bunch of people from all different walks of life coming together to stand up for what's right. They're passionate about human rights. They're angry about the current situation of the world, the way that they've been treated, the way that people they love and people in their community are being treated, and they're not going to take it anymore. They're going to stand up for what's right. I think this is when anger can be so powerful, when we understand where the anger is coming from and we use it to motivate action from ourselves and from others. And anger can also be an incredible way to unite people. Next up, we have a very interesting human emotion, which is disgust. And this was an interesting one to try and identify in different tarot cards, but the three that I've chosen are the Three of Swords from the Fantastic Menagerie, the Devil from the Cheimonette Tarot, and the Seven of Pentacles from the Stella's Tarot. All of these cards I have like a strong, like visceral aversion to, which I think can be sort of tangled up in fear for some of them. But I think disgust definitely does describe my reaction to certain elements of these cards. The Three of Swords from the Fantastic Menagerie Tarot I think is a really interesting card because depending on what I focus on, there's so many different kinds of emotions that can come up. The first reason that I chose this card to represent disgust though is literally just the way that these two birds are like making out, if that's what we can call it. The way they literally have like their beaks down each other's throat. Oh, it just makes me want to gag. And then of course, with this being the Three of Swords and we notice the character behind the tree, I think the suggestion is that the character behind the tree is catching their lover out, cheating on them. And cheating is another thing that I find disgusting. But an alternative reading of this card could be that this guy behind the tree is actually just a pervert who's come across two lovebirds, literally, in a moment of passion, and he's decided to settle down and watch. And that's also kind of gross. Then we have the Devil from the Cheimonette Tarot, and this one is just really quite unsettling. It's just a bit surreal, and I don't know what it is about these leg, arm things with their head, neck conjoined. It just kind of grosses me out. Even the weird seahorse thing with one leg, it's all just a bit off-putting. Like everything here is familiar enough for me to identify what it's supposed to be, but it's like distorted enough for me to feel like it's not quite right. And I find like my visceral, like baser human response to that is one of disgust. And then the Seven of Pentacles from the Stella's Tarot, we've got this woman sort of stuck in a spider's web with like a dragonfly or a moth sort of stuck to her as well. And this just seems like some kind of icky nightmare of giant insects taking over the world. And so this is one where it's kind of tangled up in fear, but I think the idea of like insects crawling over you, like that is just one that makes my skin crawl. Like it's disgusting. But I think what all of these cards capture is that disgust is quite a complicated human emotion. I think it's often tangled up with other emotions as well. And I think often the main one is fear. Okay, now we're on to the extra bit that I'm adding in, and that is because I pulled out so many cards that represented so many different feelings that I had quite a lot left over that I still wanted to talk about. And one of my favorite parts of Inside Out is the way that they explore and explain complex emotions and how memories can be attached to many different emotions simultaneously, even seemingly conflicting ones. And so I've kept out a few cards that I wanted to talk about that when I was trying to figure out my 3 cards for each emotion, these cards I kept sort of moving back and forth between 2 or 3 emotions. Like I couldn't decide which one it fit best. And I realized in the end that is because they capture several emotions simultaneously. The Five of Pentacles from the Oriens Tarot is actually the one that I had in almost every category other than joy. I could not decide whether a polar bear clinging to a small sheet of ice in the middle of a vast and warming ocean made me scared for the future that we're going to be living in, made me feel fearful, just as I imagined the polar bear might feel fearful, whether it made me angry about the actions of humans and how much we're impacting on the environment and the animals, and how we have so much power to do so much good and yet we decide not to collectively, and just how much that infuriates me. Or if it was one of disgust, and I think that is also of seeing again our impact and how we just seemingly have no conscience sometimes. Like that's how it feels looking at an image like this, knowing we are inflicting as a species so much suffering on much of the planet and our fellow species. So it's a combination of sadness, fear, anger, and disgust, all captured so beautifully in, I think, a really, really poignant image. Next is one from the Stella's Tarot. This is the Five of Cups. And this one, I think, mostly speaks to a feeling of sadness, of loss, of grief. But I think there's also a tad of anger here. Like, it feels kind of bitter. The fact that the character has 4 cups that are spilled out. The remaining cup they're also going to tip out onto the floor. Sort of like an anger, a bitterness that if they can't have everything, then they don't want to have anything. Like, they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater because what's the point? Like, there's just such a sense of bitterness here. And I think bitterness is definitely a strong combination of sadness and of anger. Then we've got Judgment from the Children of Litha. Like I said, this was one of the most evocative decks as I was going through it. And this card I just thought was so beautiful. It is the Judgment card, so we've got this person sort of like blowing on a horn, and they're holding a fox that is dead in their arms. It's got an arrow through its heart. And then as they're blowing on this horn, it's almost like they're invoking the spirits of the fox's ancestors, and they're coming to meet it and take it into the afterlife. And so this feels like such a beautiful, touching depiction of grief and loss, but also of hope in a sad kind of way. And so for me, this card captures 2 emotions. It's sadness and it's joy. It feels like it's a celebration of life, but also an acknowledgement of the end of it. And then I've got the Fool from the Oriens Tarot. I feel like this is such a beautiful, tender card. It's a turtle coming out of its shell for the first time. And for me, I kept moving this card between joy and fear. That joy of new life, of new experience, of new opportunity, but that fear as, like, especially with green turtles running down the sandbank for the first time, hoping to evade seagulls and birds and other predators and get to the ocean as quickly as they can. Like, there's just so much vulnerability right here in this moment, and so much vulnerability coming in the moments ahead for this turtle as well. And I think that speaks so beautifully to the overall idea of the Fool. Like, there's so much celebration and freedom and optimism and hope in the Fool, and yet so often we see them literally about to step off a cliff. Joy and fear intermingled in one, and I think this depiction of the Fool is just, it captures that so simply and effectively. So those are my picks for the different tarot cards that I would choose for the emotions inside my head from inside out. Thank you so much, Sammy, for starting this tarot challenge. I really enjoyed going through all of my decks, although it did take me hours. It was just a good opportunity to go through my cards and really focus on the images and think about my emotional response to those depictions rather than thinking about the messages and the meanings that I've learnt so well over the last several years. I also really enjoyed identifying those cards that I couldn't fit neatly into one box so easily, and so then just sort of allowing myself to explore the fact that many of the cards represent so well an intermingling of many emotions. So I hope you enjoyed my response to this tag. If you've done a response to the tag or are planning to, please let me know in the comments below so I can come and watch your video response. Again, a big thank you to Sammy, whose video will be in the description box below, so please go check that out. And of course, a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for all of their support and for sponsoring my channel. And especially big thank you goes to Livia, Lynette Brown, Laurie, and Ian Yitzhak for their very generous support of me. But that's all I've got for you for this video. I will talk to you in the comments below and again soon in another video. Until then, so much love. Bye.